My name is Father Matthew, and I have been a servant of God for over 30 years. I live in a monastery just outside Jerusalem, not far from the ancient walls of the Holy City. Every day is an opportunity for prayer, reflection, and service. My brothers say that I am a devout man, but I know very well how faith must be renewed, fortified, and nourished day by day. One can never become complacent. Even the most fervent priest must constantly seek the light of God. Otherwise, he risks getting lost in routine. It was a night like any other, or so I thought. I had retreated to my cell after spending most of the day visiting the sick and hearing confessions. I had prayed my rosary and opened my breviary for the night office, but something was troubling me. A strange feeling, as if a weight pressed upon my heart, a sense that something important was about to happen. I knelt down, the Bible open on the worn wooden stand, the candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the sacred pages. I prayed intensely, asking God to guide me, to show me the way. I felt unsettled, as though there was a message I was meant to receive, a revelation on its way. Immersed in prayer, it happened. At first, it was like a faint murmur, a distant voice growing louder. I opened my eyes, but my room was empty. Then I felt a force lifting me, a presence pulling me upward. There was no pain, only a sensation of lightness, as if my soul had detached from my body. I found myself enveloped in a darkness so deep it seemed to consume all hope. The air itself was heavy, oppressive, and around me stretched a desolate landscape, like an immense cavern teeming with shadows. The only sound was a continuous wailing, a chorus of anguished cries piercing the silence. As I looked around, I realized I was not alone. There were souls everywhere, tormented in a state of agony beyond imagination. A man bent under the weight of rusted chains was dragging himself toward me. His figure was hunched, his face obscured by shadow. But when he lifted his eyes to me, I saw an expression of pain and remorse so profound I could not look away. "Help me," he groaned, his voice broken. "Help me escape this torment." "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer, but I couldn't stop myself. "Because I betrayed my calling," the man replied, tears streaming down his face. "I preached God's word, but didn't live by it. I condemned others, but ignored my own sins. My pride blinded me, and now I am here." That confession struck me to the core. I realized it wasn't just this man who suffered so. Everywhere I turned, I saw other souls, each with their own story of failure, hypocrisy, missed opportunities. Some were wealthy people who had ignored the poor. Some were pastors who had used their position for personal gain, and others were men and women who had lived for their own pleasure, never turning their gaze toward God. In the distance, another figure approached. It was a priest I had met many years before. I remembered him as an eloquent man, full of zeal for the gospel, but now he was wrapped in heavy chains, his face marked by suffering. "Why you of all people?" I asked, unable to hold back my tears. "I judged harshly," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I rejected sinners instead of welcoming them. I spoke of God's mercy, but I never showed it. Now there is no mercy for me." Each story I heard was like a blow to my heart. I felt as though I carried the weight of their guilt, as though the burden of their choices pressed down on my own soul. But what struck me most was that many of them had countless chances to change, to repent, to turn back to God, yet they had ignored them. Why? Why had they chosen pride, indifference, hypocrisy? The landscape around me seemed to mirror the despair of these souls. The ground was barren, cracked, with tongues of fire emerging from the fissures. Each flame was a torment, but consumed nothing. The fire burned without destroying, and the cries continued unceasing. I wondered how long I would remain there, how much more I could endure. Then a voice rose above the others. It was not a human voice, but something deeper, more powerful. I could not understand the words, but their force shook me. It was like a summons, a compelling force that urged me to look more closely, to understand more fully the meaning of what I saw. And so I did. I stood still in silence, listening. The cries of the souls told me stories of wasted opportunities, forsaken loves, rejected mercy. Each soul had a face, a voice, a regret. I realized that my presence there was not just to see, but to learn. I had to carry this knowledge with me, this awareness that hell was not only a place of torment, but a warning to those who still had time, who could still make a choice. When I finally felt my soul was ready to leave that place, I turned around one last time. I saw the souls continuing to suffer, but I also saw a deeper truth. They were not there because God had abandoned them. They were there because they had abandoned God. And that, I thought, was what I should remember. The darkness faded slowly, like fog retreating at dawn. It was a sudden relief, but not only that, it felt like breathing for the first time after being submerged underwater for too long. Suddenly, I found myself surrounded by a warm, enveloping light, a luminosity that seemed to radiate not just warmth but a deep and tangible peace. It was not like sunlight, which is too intense to look at directly. This light, I could gaze at without ever averting my eyes because it did not burn. It invigorated. Before me, a lush expanse stretched out, dotted with majestic trees that seemed to vibrate in harmony with a celestial melody. I could not identify its source, but it was everywhere. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every stream sang in unison, creating a symphony I had never heard on Earth. I felt small, but not insignificant. It was as if I were part of a great whole symphony where every note had its place and purpose. In the distance, I saw figures moving, some alone, others in groups. Their voices were so sweet and full of life, joining the melody that permeated the air. I approached, driven by curiosity. Each step felt light, as if I had no weight, yet I was aware of every movement. When I reached the first souls, I saw that their faces were luminous, serene, full of joy. They greeted me with smiles, but without words, and I understood that they had no need to speak. Their presence communicated more than words could ever convey. One of these souls approached me. She was a woman whose features reflected an inner beauty that shone outward. She had been a mother on earth, a simple woman who had spent her life loving, helping her children, serving others without ever seeking recognition. Here, in the light of heaven, her humility reflected like a regal garment. There was no remorse in her, only gratitude. Her hands, which on earth had worked tirelessly, now moved with ease, as if to suggest that every gesture here was an act of love. As I observed her, other figures joined her, some I recognized, saints, martyrs, biblical figures I had revered all my life. Each of them seemed engaged in something meaningful, an act of worship, a silent prayer, or simply a joyful communion with others. There was no idleness, but neither was there effort. Every soul was immersed in an activity that exuded love and peace. I was struck by the fact that there were no barriers. Everyone was united. There were no distinctions between great and small, rich and poor, powerful and humble. Heaven knew no earthly hierarchies. The only measure was love. Each soul shone according to the amount of love they had given and received. The more a soul had loved, the brighter they glowed. I approached an elderly man who seemed to be telling a story. He did not speak, but the other souls around him listened intently, as if his experience were a precious lesson. His presence radiated wisdom. I turned to him and felt as though he were speaking directly to me, even though he made no sound. "I am here because I loved without conditions," he seemed to say. "I was not perfect, but I sought God in everything, and when I found him, I shared him with others." Those words moved me deeply. I remembered the souls I had seen in the darkness, their suffering, their despair, and I realized that the difference was all in a choice, to love or not to love. Those souls in hell were not without faith, but their faith had remained barren. Here, on the other hand, everything was alive, vibrant, because it had been nourished by love. As I reflected on these things, I felt a call like a gentle but firm voice. I turned and saw that the landscape of heaven was beginning to change. The light grew more intense, as if it were guiding me somewhere. I let myself be led, for every fiber of my being knew I had to go. There was no fear, only a sense of anticipation. My journey was not yet over. I did not know exactly what it was, nor did I know what that vision meant or why it had been shown to me. I was still troubled by what I had seen in the darkness. Tormented souls lost forever, enveloped in pain beyond all imagining. But just as I struggled to understand, to pray, to make sense of it all, a new scene opened before my eyes. At first, it seemed like a hazy dream. I saw a city, Jerusalem. I was sure of it, but it was a different Jerusalem, bathed in a light not of this world. There were no shadows, no night. The city seemed suspended in a time I could not comprehend. At the center of everything was the Golden Gate, closed, massive, solemn, just as I had always imagined it when reading the scriptures in Ezekiel 44. God speaks of a gate that would remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. This was the gate I had before me, sealed, silent, and yet alive. A crack ran along the stones, and a faint tremor shook the ground. I held my breath. I could not look away, as though something profoundly sacred was taking place. I then remembered another prophecy, that of the prophet Zechariah. "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Zechariah 9 verse 9. I had always preached that this prophecy was fulfilled when Jesus triumphantly entered Jerusalem. But here before my eyes, it seemed a new fulfillment was about to occur. The crack widened. The light seeping through was warm and golden, a light that spoke directly to the soul. It wasn't like the sun, nor like fire. It was more like the light of paradise I had just seen, pure, invigorating, a manifestation of the divine presence. The gate, after centuries of silence, was giving way. The stones seemed to slide aside without noise, as if obeying a higher command. As the light grew stronger, I began to see something beyond the gate. A figure emerged, distant but unmistakable. It was no ordinary man, no earthly king. It was the promised prince, the Messiah whom the world had awaited. I couldn't clearly see his face, shrouded in a radiance that made it impossible to discern features, but his bearing, his majesty, the reverent silence that accompanied him, all proclaimed his identity. I tried to comprehend what was happening. My mind turned to the passages of the Bible I had studied and preached for years. I remembered Jesus' words, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come." Matthew 24 verse 42. And I thought of the words from Revelation, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him." Revelation 1 verse 7. Could it be that I was witnessing that moment, that the king's return was so near, or was this a sign, a forewarning, a call to prepare? The figure moved forward, and with each step, the light spread, flooding Jerusalem and beyond. The streets, the rooftops, even the distant hills seemed to glow. There was no sound, no chaos, only a silence heavy with majesty. And as I watched, I realized I was not the only witness. I heard voices whispering, praying, singing like a distant echo. The people around the city seemed to have been awakened from a deep slumber. Some ran toward the gate, others fell to their knees. Some wept, others cried out with joy. And still, others remained paralyzed with awe. But not everyone reacted the same way. I saw some who tried to hide, who covered their faces, who fled to the hills. It was as if the light was too intense for them, as if they could not bear the truth that the open gate represented. And yet, the light did not abandon them. It followed them, sought to reach them, to touch their souls as well. It was a light of mercy and justice that made no distinctions. I realized that this vision was not just for me. It was a message for everyone. This was not a distant or symbolic event. It was something imminent, something real. The gate had opened, and with it, a new chapter in humanity's history was unfolding. I did not know how much time I had to tell what I'd seen, nor how much time we all had to prepare, but I knew one thing. The time was near, and I could not remain silent. When I opened my eyes again and found myself once more kneeling in my room, a sense of disorientation enveloped me. I felt overwhelmed, as if an immense weight had been placed on my soul. It wasn't just the memory of the visions of hell, paradise, and the Golden Gate thrown open. It was the awareness that everything I had seen carried a profound meaning, a message I could not ignore. The candle flickered on the lectern. The room was still silent, but my heart was pounding. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady, and sat on the small stool by my bed. The rosary lay in my lap, but I dared not move. I needed to collect my thoughts, to make sense of all that had been shown to me. I thought again of the Golden Gate, sealed for centuries, the object of countless prophecies and speculations. Ezekiel's writings echoed in my mind. This gate is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. Ezekiel 44 verse 2. I wondered, is that truly what it meant? Was what I saw a sign, a warning that the time was near? But near to what? Was it the fulfillment of an ancient promise, the return of the king? As the days passed, I realized that I couldn't simply ignore the vision. I needed to understand. It wasn't enough to just remember. I had to delve deeper, study, piece together all the fragments of that experience. I began reading the sacred text with greater intensity. Every verse that mentioned Jerusalem, its gates, its role in the prophecies, I analyzed carefully. I sought to discover if others before me had had similar insights. I turned to historical records, the writings of the church fathers, the accounts of pilgrims and scholars. The Golden Gate, that mysterious sealed threshold, had always been at the center of legends, expectations, and dreams. According to Jewish traditions, it would be the Messiah who would enter through that gate. For Christians, it symbolized the return of Christ, the sign of his imminent reign. In time, I came to understand that the visions of hell, paradise, and the gate were all intertwined. They were not just isolated images. They were a unified message. God was showing me the condition of the human soul, the consequences of our choices, the reality of divine mercy and justice. Hell was a warning, a call not to neglect our faith. Paradise was a promise of what awaits us if we follow the path of love. And the gate was the final passage, the fulfillment of the prophecies. It was an invitation to prepare, to not be caught off guard. Reading and praying were no longer enough. I felt compelled to see that gate with my own eyes in reality. I decided to journey to Jerusalem, the place of my vision. It was not an easy or swift trip, but with every step I took, every stone I walked upon, I came closer to understanding the meaning of all that I had seen. When I finally stood before the Golden Gate, closed as always, a shiver ran through me. It wasn't merely a physical place. It was the symbol of awaiting a promise. The sealed stones seemed to speak, telling the story of generations who had awaited the fulfillment of the scriptures. I sat down a short distance away with my journal in hand and began to write. It wasn't easy to put down everything I'd seen and felt. Words seemed insufficient, but I had to try. I had to convey the message, leave it as a legacy for anyone willing to listen. I understood that my experience was not solely about me. It was a message for all Christians. What I had seen was not just a personal vision. It was an urgent call. The world could no longer ignore God's promises. We could no longer live in distraction and indifference. We had to wake up, return to an authentic faith, to the roots of our hope. The Golden Gate, with all its mystery, was not just a walled structure. It was a symbol of Christ's return, the fulfillment of God's promises. I had been shown what happens when we lose sight of our calling. Lost souls cries in the darkness. But I had also been shown the reward of faithfulness, the light of paradise, the embrace of divine love. And finally, I had been shown the gate opening. That passage, that sign, was a message of hope, but also of urgency. It was an invitation to prepare ourselves, to remain watchful, to live as true disciples. Now, back in my monastery, I can no longer be the same. Every homily I deliver, every prayer I recite, every confession I hear is infused with the memory of that vision. I share with the faithful what I saw, not just to astonish them. I want them to understand, to realize that faith is not something static, something we can push to the background. It is a constant call to prepare for the return of the King. And so, I continue day after day. The memory of the light streaming from the Golden Gate guides me, urges me not to remain silent. I am determined to tell this story for as long as I have breath because I know the time is near. When the day comes, when the gate truly opens before everyone's eyes, I want to know that I have done my part. I want to know that I have helped prepare people's hearts for the encounter with the promised king.